In this lesson, we'll cover framing elevations. So you may say, what's a framing elevation and how's it different than a regular elevation? A regular elevation would be used for, let's say, an architectural elevation, showing your exterior walls or interior walls and all the elements that go into that wall. A framing elevation is just what it said. It's an elevation showing the framing, so your beams, your trusses, your supports. Now, these two types of elevations can be created from the View tab within your ribbon. So if you go to the View tab, there's an elevation dropdown. On the elevation dropdown, you have elevation, which is your normal architectural elevation, showing you all of the walls, doors, and windows, for example. What we're going to look at in this lesson is the framing elevation. This basically shows you all of your framing elements, your beams, your columns, your vertical bracing. Now, it works a little differently as well, because the framing elevation has to be bound to a plane or a grid line. And if you have multiple grid lines established, by default, the actual crop just goes to span adjacent grid lines. But you can always adjust this. So let's see how this works. Click Framing Elevation. Now, if I look in the lower left corner of Revit, you'll see it's asking me to click a grid or name reference plane to place the elevation. I'm going to zoom in to illustrate this. I'm going to move my mouse over one of the grid lines. Once you move over the grid line, you'll see the elevation marker appear, and depending upon what side of the grid line you move to, that marker will point in one direction or the other. Move your mouse so your elevation marker is oriented like the one you see on the screen. Then left click. Now this places the elevation marker and creates the elevation. Click Modify in the upper left. Now let's click on the elevation marker. Now there's two parts to click on when you look at this marker. One is the circle. If you click on the circle of the elevation symbol, you see little boxes appear around the outside, and only one is checkmarked. This is basically telling you that for this symbol, you could actually have 4 elevations. There's only one right now, and it's the one pointing up or north. But you could actually checkmark other symbols. Now, the elevation numbers and tags do not appear until you place the plan view or this elevation view on a sheet. Then that will update with the correct elevation number and sheet number. Go ahead and click on the white background to deselect. Now, move your mouse over the little pointer or triangular shape of the elevation marker and click it. Once you click it, this displays the actual view or range of what you're going to see within this elevation. And as you can see, it doesn't go the entire length of the building. It's kind of cropped. But by rule, in a framing elevation, it spans grid to grid. You see it's tied to this grid on the left that I'm mousing over, and then tied to the grid on the right that I'm mousing over. Also, the depth of the view only goes part way past the grid line that we selected. But you could always drag this to actually include additional elements within this elevation. Likewise, you could select the blue dot, the drag handle on either side, and drag it right or left to increase or decrease the amount of elements you see within the elevation. Now, you could also do this on the elevation itself. Now, as far as the naming of this elevation, if you look at the properties area on the left and scroll down, I'll see the view name is called Elevation 2-A. To get to that, you could simply browse in the project browser down to my elevations framing elevation and double-click Elevation 2-A. Or you could select that triangular part of the elevation mark, right-click, and then from the right-click menu, you could select Go to Elevation View. So let's go to that elevation view in one of those two methods, either by double-clicking it in the project browser or right-clicking the symbol and go to Elevation View. Now here's the elevation view. I see it's actually cropped, and I can move over the crop box. I can select the crop box, and here I can readjust the crop box to include more or include less within this actual cropped region. Same thing with the crop box on the top. I can adjust this as well to include or exclude information into this crop view. You can also turn off the crop by using the icon on the bottom of your screen to hide the crop region. And if you wanted to change the visibility of what you see, in the property area on the left, I can click Edit to the right of Visibility Graphics to change the visibility of elements within the view. You also can apply a view template. Right now, there is no view template applied to this view. But I could scroll in the properties to view template, click none, and then from here I could choose the template for my framing elevation. Then when I select it and click OK, all of the settings defined in that template for the view are applied now to this view. So as a review, in this lesson we looked at framing elevations. We first discussed the difference between an elevation and a framing elevation, where a framing elevation basically shows us our structural members, our supports within the walls themselves, such as beams, columns, and braces. From there, we created the actual elevation by placing it on a grid. And then we noted the actual crop region for the elevation as it only spans grid to grid. From there, we looked at the properties of elevation, and then we went to the actual elevation itself. Once we were on the view, we looked at the properties of the elevation again. From the properties box, we could change the actual visibility graphics by editing those, but we also looked at applying a view template to the elevation.